Queen Zarathek stood in the center of the massive arena. Her tall body gleamed like purple crystal under the bright lights. She was beautiful in a way that was both alien and frightening. Her 6 arms moved slowly as she checked her equipment one last time. Each finger ended in a sharp claw that could cut through metal. The grand amphitheater on Nexus Prime was the largest building she had ever seen. Thousands of different alien creatures sat in rows that went up so high she could barely see the top. They had come from every corner of the galaxy to watch this battle. But this was not a fight with weapons or ships. This was a battle of minds. Zarathek was the queen of the Velthari Empire. Her people were famous across the galaxy for being the smartest warriors. They could think together as one giant mind. When Velthari fought, they moved like parts of one body. No other species could match them in planning battles. Today, she would fight for control of 3 star systems. These systems had planets full of rare metals that could power spaceships for 1,000 years. Every major empire in the galaxy wanted them. Instead of starting a war that would destroy everything, the Galactic Council decided to hold a contest. The smartest military leader would win the prize for their people. The arena floor was empty except for Zarathek and a large metal device in the center. This machine would create a fake battle in space using light and computers. Both fighters would control armies that looked real but were made of pure energy. The winner would be the one who destroyed the other's forces completely. Zarathek's enemy had not arrived yet. She knew it would be Commander Krex of the Skordan hegemony. The Skordans were large, reptile-like creatures who loved war. They had been fighting other species for hundreds of years. Commander Krex was their greatest general. He had never lost a battle. In the crowd, a small human woman sat quietly among a group of tall blue aliens. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chen, and she was an archaeologist. She studied old ruins and ancient cities. She had come to Nexus Prime to look at some very old buildings, not to watch battles. But when she heard about the contest, she became curious. Humans were new to space travel. Most aliens thought they were primitive and weak. They had only left their home planet 50 years ago. Sarah knew that many of the creatures in this arena had never seen a human before. Some probably did not even know that humans existed. Sarah watched as Queen Zarathek prepared for battle. The alien queen was impressive. Her crystalline skin changed colors as her emotions shifted. Right now, it was a calm purple. But Sarah could see flashes of orange around her joints. The human had learned to read Velthari emotions during her research on ancient alien cultures. A loud horn sounded across the arena. The crowd fell silent. Commander Krex entered from the opposite side of the arena. He was enormous, even larger than the queen. His gray scales were covered in scars from old battles. His yellow eyes looked around the arena with contempt. He did not seem worried about fighting the famous Velthari queen. Krex walked to his position at the battle machine. His heavy footsteps echoed in the quiet arena. When he reached his control station, he turned to look at Zarathek. His mouth opened to show rows of sharp teeth. It was not a smile. It was a threat. The arena's main screen lit up above them. An old alien with too many eyes stepped forward. He was the judge for this contest. His voice was translated into hundreds of languages so everyone could understand. "Warriors of the galaxy," the judge said, "today we decide the fate of 3 star systems through trial by combat of the mind. Queen Zarathek of the Velthari will face Commander Krex of the Skordans. The battle will take place in a simulated star system with planets, moons, asteroid fields, and nebulae. Each warrior will command a fleet of 1,000 ships. Victory goes to whoever destroys all enemy forces or captures their home base. Are the fighters ready?" Zarathek raised one of her clawed hands. Her skin was now bright blue, showing confidence and determination. "The Velthari are ready to prove our superiority once again." Commander Krex simply grunted and cracked his knuckles. The sound was like breaking bones. "Let's get this over with. I have real wars to fight after I win these systems." The judge nodded. "Then let the battle begin." The arena went dark. Then the space above them exploded with light and color. A giant holographic star system appeared, floating in the air where everyone could see it. There were 7 planets, 3 suns, and countless smaller objects floating in space. It looked completely real. Sarah leaned forward in her seat. She could see 2 fleets of ships appearing on opposite sides of the system. Zarathek's ships were elegant and smooth, like living creatures made of metal. Krex's ships were heavy and covered in weapons. They looked like they were built for destruction. The battle was about to begin. Sarah felt her heart beating faster. She did not know why, but she had a feeling that this fight would be different from anything anyone expected. Something told her that before this day was over, the galaxy would see something it had never seen before. Queen Zarathek placed her hands on the control interface. Her skin began to glow as she connected her mind to the battle computer. All around the galaxy, other Velthari would also connect their thoughts to help their queen. It was their greatest advantage, and no one had ever found a way to beat it. At least, no one had found a way yet. The holographic star system came alive with movement. Queen Zarathek's fleet moved like a school of fish through space. Every ship knew exactly where the others were going. They spread out in perfect formations that had been planned thousands of years ago by the greatest Velthari minds. Commander Krex's ships moved differently. They charged forward in rough groups, like wild animals hunting for food. But Sarah could see there was intelligence behind their movements. The Skordon commander was not stupid, just aggressive. Zarathek began her attack by splitting her forces into 3 groups. One group went to capture the mining stations around the largest planet. Another group moved to control the space routes between the planets. The third group stayed back to protect her main base. It was exactly what the military book said to do. The crowd watched in amazement as the Velthari ships moved together without a single mistake. When one ship turned left, 50 others turned with it at exactly the same moment. When a squadron attacked an enemy position, support ships arrived at the perfect time with exactly the right weapons. It was like watching a deadly dance. For the first hour of battle, Queen Zarathek dominated completely. Her ships captured 4 of the 7 planets and most of the asteroid mining stations. Commander Krex's forces were pushed back again and again. Every time he tried to attack, the Velthari were ready for him. Sarah watched the Queen's crystalline skin change from blue to bright gold. This color meant victory and pride among the Velthari. The alien queen was enjoying her expected win, but then something strange happened. Commander Krex stopped trying to win back the planets he had lost. Instead, his ships began moving in ways that made no sense. They would attack empty space, then suddenly change direction and hit targets that seemed unimportant. Sometimes his ships would split up for no reason, then come back together to attack something completely different. At first, Zarathek ignored these strange movements. Her ships continued their perfect formations and their logical attacks. But slowly, the random attacks began to cause problems. A supply convoy would be destroyed just as it was bringing ammunition to the front lines. A communications station would be attacked right when it was needed to coordinate a major offensive. The Velthari queen began to look confused. Her skin shifted to purple, then to orange. She could not understand what Commander Krex was trying to do. His attacks had no pattern that her computers could recognize. There was no logic to his strategy. Sarah found herself studying the battle more carefully. As a scientist, she was trained to look for patterns that others might miss. She watched as Krex's ships darted around the holographic space like insects. At first, their movements seemed completely random. But the longer she watched, the more she began to see something else. "He's not following any military strategy," she whispered to herself. "But he's not being random either." The blue alien sitting next to her heard her words. "What did you say, human?" the creature asked in broken English. "The Skordan commander," Sarah said, still watching the battle. "His ships are moving like music." The blue alien looked confused and turned away. But Sarah kept watching. She was beginning to understand something that no one else in the arena could see. Commander Krex was not trying to win through careful planning like the Velthari. He was improvising. Every time Queen Zarathek made a move, he responded not with a planned counterattack, but with something completely new. He was making up his strategy as he went along, like a musician playing a song without sheet music. The longer the battle continued, the more effective his strange tactics became. Zarathek's perfect formations began to break apart. Her ships were designed to work together as one mind, but they could not adapt quickly enough to Krex's unpredictable attacks. By the third hour of battle, the situation had changed completely. Commander Krex had taken back 2 planets and destroyed several of the Queen's major fleets. More importantly, he had disrupted the Velthari communication network. Without perfect coordination, Zarathek's forces began to make mistakes. The Queen's skin was now a dark red color. Sarah had learned that this meant fear and anger among the Velthari. For the first time in her life, Queen Zarathek was facing an enemy she could not understand. In the arena, the crowd began to murmur in dozens of different languages. Everyone had expected the Velthari to win easily. Their perfect teamwork and centuries of military experience should have been enough to defeat any opponent. But Commander Krex was proving that sometimes chaos could beat order. Sarah looked around at the thousands of alien faces in the arena. Some looked excited by the unexpected turn in the battle. Others seemed worried about what this might mean for their own empires. If the famous Velthari could be defeated by unpredictable tactics, then no one was safe. On the arena floor, Queen Zarathek's 6 arms moved frantically over her controls. She was trying to find a pattern in Krex's attacks, some logic that her computers could analyze and counter. But every time she thought she understood his strategy, he would do something completely different. Commander Krex, on the other hand, looked relaxed and confident. His yellow eyes gleamed as he watched his chaotic tactics tear apart the enemy's perfect formations. He was enjoying the hunt. Sarah realized that she was watching something historical. This battle would change how warfare was fought across the galaxy. The age of perfect planning and logical strategy might be ending. In its place might come an age of improvisation and creative thinking. But as she watched Queen Zarathek struggle against an enemy she could not comprehend, Sarah began to see something that perhaps no one else in the arena could see. The human mind was different from both the Velthari collective consciousness and the Skordon aggressive simplicity. Humans understood both order and chaos. They could plan like the Velthari and improvise like the Skordons. And suddenly, Sarah realized that she might be the only person in the arena who truly understood what was happening in this battle. By the 4th hour of battle, Queen Zarathek was losing badly. Her perfect fleets were scattered across the holographic star system. Ships that had once moved together like parts of one body now struggled to communicate with each other. Commander Krex's chaotic attacks had broken the invisible threads that connected the Velthari minds. The Queen's crystalline skin had turned almost black. This was a color that most aliens in the arena had never seen before. It meant despair and complete confusion among the Velthari. Her 6 arms shook as she tried to input new commands into her control system. Commander Krex pressed his advantage without mercy. His ships appeared everywhere at once, striking targets that seemed to have no military value, then disappearing before the Velthari could respond. He attacked a hospital ship, then a food transport, then a communications relay that was far from any battle. Each attack seemed random, but together, they were destroying the Queen's ability to fight. Sarah watched as Zarathek's remaining forces huddled around their home base like frightened animals. The Queen had lost 5 of the 7 planets, and most of her fleet. Worse, she seemed to have lost the will to fight. Her legendary strategic mind could not understand an enemy who had no strategy. The crowd in the arena was silent now. Many of the aliens looked shocked. The Velthari had been the greatest military force in the galaxy for over 1,000 years. Their tactics were taught in military academies on every civilized world. Seeing them defeated by what looked like random violence was disturbing, but Sarah could see that it was not random violence. The longer she watched Commander Krex's movements, the clearer the pattern became to her human mind. He was not just attacking anything he wanted. He was responding to Queen Zarathek's moves like a musician responding to another musician. When the Queen tried to rebuild her formations, Krex would attack the ships that were trying to get into position. When she attempted to establish a new communication network, he would strike at the relay stations. When she pulled her forces back to defend her base, he would attack empty space where she might want to expand later. It was like listening to 2 people play music together, but only one of them knew they were making music. Zarathek was trying to play a written symphony, note by note, exactly as it was supposed to be played. Krex was improvising jazz, responding to her melody with his own creative variations. The problem was that the queen did not understand what jazz was. Sarah found herself standing up without realizing it. Around her, thousands of alien beings continued to watch the battle, but she was no longer paying attention to them. Her mind was racing as she saw the solution to Queen Zarathek's problem. On the arena floor, Commander Krex launched his final attack. His remaining ships surrounded the Queen's home base in a formation that looked chaotic but was actually perfectly designed to respond to any escape attempt she might make. No matter which way she tried to run, he would be ready for her. Queen Zarathek raised her hands from the control interface. Her skin had gone completely black now, and her body seemed to be dimming like a dying light. In the language of her people, this meant she was ready to surrender. "Wait!" Sarah shouted before she could stop herself. The word echoed across the silent arena. Thousands of alien eyes turned to look at the small human woman standing among the blue creatures in the upper seats. Security guards began moving toward her, but Queen Zarathek held up one of her clawed hands to stop them. The Queen's translator converted Sarah's English into the clicking, whistling language of the Velthari. Zarathek's black skin shifted slightly toward dark purple. She was curious about what the primitive human might have to say. "Your Majesty," Sarah called out, her voice carrying clearly in the silent arena. "He's not being random. He's playing jazz." The crowd began to murmur in confusion. Most of the aliens in the arena had never heard of jazz music. Even those who had studied human culture did not understand what music had to do with military strategy, but something in Sarah's voice made Queen Zarathek pause. The alien queen had studied many species during her long life. She knew that humans were supposed to be primitive, but their short time in space had been filled with surprises. Perhaps this one had seen something that her advanced mind had missed. "Explain," Zarathek said in English, her voice carrying across the arena through the translation system. Sarah felt her heart pounding as every creature in the amphitheater stared at her. She had never spoken to so many beings at once, especially not to royalty from advanced alien civilizations. But she could see that Queen Zarathek was genuinely listening, and that might be the only chance to save her. "Jazz is a type of human music," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Musicians play together, but they don't follow written notes exactly. They listen to what the other musicians are doing and respond with their own ideas. They improvise. They make up new melodies based on what they hear." The Queen's skin shifted to purple, then to orange. She was beginning to understand, but she needed more explanation. "Commander Krex isn't following a battle plan," Sarah continued. "He's improvising his strategy based on what you do. Every time you make a logical move, he responds with something creative and unexpected. You're trying to play a symphony, but he's playing jazz. You need to jazz back." The arena fell completely silent. Even Commander Krex had stopped moving his ships to listen to this strange conversation. The idea that military strategy could be compared to music was completely alien to most of the creatures present. But Queen Zarathek was beginning to see the truth in Sarah's words. Her people had always prided themselves on perfect coordination and flawless execution of planned strategies. They had never learned to improvise because they had never needed to. Their collective consciousness allowed them to plan better than anyone else, so they had never developed the ability to be creative in the moment. Now she was facing an enemy who was naturally creative, and her greatest strength had become her greatest weakness. The Queen's skin began to change color again, shifting from black to purple to blue. She was thinking faster than she had ever thought before. If this human was right, then everything she knew about warfare was incomplete. But if this human was wrong, then she was about to lose the most important battle of her life based on advice from a primitive species. Commander Krex laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. "Are you really going to take advice from a human?" he asked in his rough voice. "Your species rules half the galaxy, and you need help from creatures who just learned to fly between stars?" Endar. Queen Zarathek looked at Sarah, then at Krex, then at the holographic display showing her defeated forces. She had two choices: surrender now and lose everything, or trust a human and try something that no Velthari had ever attempted before. Her skin turned bright gold as she made her decision. Queen Zarathek placed her hands back on the control interface. Her golden skin meant she had made a decision that could change everything. Around the arena, thousands of aliens watched in complete silence, waiting to see what would happen next. Dr. Sarah Chen, the Queen said, somehow knowing the human's name even though they had never met. Your people have a saying about teaching old creatures new tricks. Today, you will teach a queen to play jazz. Commander Krex laughed again. But this time his laughter sounded less confident. Something in the Queen's voice had changed. The despair was gone, replaced by curiosity and determination. Sarah felt the weight of every eye in the arena on her. She was just an archaeologist who studied old buildings. She had never been in a real battle or commanded a spaceship, but she understood music. And she understood improvisation. And somehow, those things might be enough to save a queen. The key is to stop trying to predict what he'll do, Sarah called out. Instead, listen to what he's doing and respond to it. Like musicians in a band, you play off each other. When he attacks your left flank, don't reinforce it. Do something completely unexpected on your right flank. Make him respond to you instead of you responding to him. Queen Zarathek's 6 arms moved over the controls, but not in the precise, calculated way they had before. For the first time in her life, she tried to quiet the voices of the other Velthari minds connected to hers. Instead of listening to their careful plans and logical strategies, she tried to listen to her own instincts. It felt wrong. Everything in her culture taught that individual thinking was inferior to collective wisdom. But as she watched Commander Krex's ships moving in their chaotic patterns, she began to understand what the human meant. His movements had rhythm, like music, but it was music without sheet notes. The Queen selected a small group of her surviving ships and did something no Velthari commander had ever done before. Instead of sending them to reinforce her defenses or follow a predetermined strategy, she sent them to attack one of Krex's supply convoys that was far from the main battle. Commander Krex was surprised. The attack made no logical sense from a military standpoint. The convoy was not important to the battle, and the ships she used could have been better employed defending her base. But because it was unexpected, his forces were not in position to defend it. The convoy was destroyed. More importantly, Krex had to pull ships away from his main attack to protect his other supply lines. For the first time in the battle, he was reacting to her moves instead of making her react to his. Queen Zarathek felt a strange new sensation. Her crystalline skin flickered between colors as she experienced something the Velthari had no word for. The joy of creative thinking. It was like discovering a new sense that she had never known existed. She tried again. This time, she took a group of damaged ships that should have been returning to base for repairs. Instead of following procedure, she sent them on a suicide mission against one of Krex's communication stations. The damaged ships moved slowly and looked like they were retreating, so Krex ignored them. When they suddenly changed course and destroyed his communications hub, his forces lost coordination for several crucial minutes. Commander Krex's yellow eyes narrowed as he realized what was happening. The Queen was no longer fighting like a Velthari. Her moves were becoming unpredictable, creative, even playful. She was learning to improvise, but Krex was a master of improvisation. If the Queen wanted to play this game, he would show her how it was really done. He began to move his ships in even more complex patterns, creating rhythms within rhythms, like a jazz musician playing multiple melodies at the same time. The battle became something the galaxy had never seen before. 2 military minds, each using completely different approaches to improvisation, began to create something that was part warfare and part performance art. Zarathek's ships moved with newfound grace, no longer locked into rigid formations but flowing like water or wind. Krex's ships responded with their own patterns, sometimes harmonizing with hers, sometimes contrasting, always surprising. Sarah watched in amazement as her simple explanation of jazz music transformed an ancient alien culture's entire approach to warfare. The Queen was not just learning to improvise, she was becoming an artist of battle, but Krex was still winning. His experience with chaos and unpredictability gave him advantages that the Queen could not overcome quickly. Even with her newfound creativity, she was still losing ships and territory. That was when Queen Zarathek realized the true power of what the human had taught her. Jazz was not just about individual improvisation. It was about group improvisation. Musicians played together, building on each other's ideas, creating something larger than any of them could make alone. The Queen opened her mind fully to her people for the first time since the battle began. But instead of asking them to follow predetermined plans, she asked them to be creative with her. She shared her new understanding of improvisation with every Velthari mind connected to the battle network. The effect was immediate and stunning. Suddenly, it was not just Queen Zarathek learning to improvise. It was 1,000 Velthari minds, all learning to be creative at the same time. Her ships began to move with a fluid coordination that was both planned and spontaneous, like a jazz orchestra, where every musician knew the song but was free to interpret it in their own way. Commander Krex had never faced anything like this. He was a master of individual improvisation. But now, he was facing collective improvisation. Every time he thought he understood the pattern of one ship, 10 others would do something completely different. Yet somehow, they all worked together in perfect harmony. The Queen's skin blazed with colors that had no names in the Velthari language. She was experiencing emotions that her people had never felt before. The excitement of discovery, the joy of creativity, the thrill of making something new. Her ships danced through space like living things, each one unique but part of a greater whole. Within an hour, the tide of battle had completely turned. Commander Krex found himself being pushed back on every front by an enemy that was both perfectly coordinated and completely unpredictable. His ships, so effective against rigid formations, could not adapt to an enemy that was constantly changing. Sarah watched as Queen Zarathek's forces began to surround Commander Krex's remaining ships. But this was not the mechanical encirclement of a traditional military strategy. This was something artistic, beautiful, like watching a complex dance performed by creatures made of light and energy. Commander Krex made one last desperate attack, throwing all his remaining forces directly at the Queen's home base. It was a move born of frustration and pride rather than strategy. Queen Zarathek could have easily defended against it using traditional tactics. Instead, she did something that no military academy in the galaxy would have recommended. She pulled her defenders away from her base and used them to attack Krex's now empty home territory. It was a move so unexpected, so contrary to logic, that it took Commander Krex's breath away. In that moment, he realized he had lost more than just a battle. He had lost to an idea, a way of thinking that his warrior culture had never encountered. He had been defeated by music. The holographic battle ended with Commander Krex's surrender. His few remaining ships hung motionless in space, surrounded by Queen Zarathek's forces, in formations that looked more like art than military strategy. The arena fell completely silent as the display faded away. Queen Zarathek stood at her control station, her crystalline skin cycling through colors that had never been seen before. The Velthari had no words for what she was feeling because they had never experienced collective creativity on this scale. Her people's rigid minds had been open to possibilities they never knew existed. Commander Krex slowly raised his massive hands in the universal gesture of surrender. His yellow eyes looked at the Queen with something that might have been respect. "I have never been defeated by someone who fought like me," he said in his grinding voice. "You learned to improvise better than I could improvise myself." The judge with too many eyes stepped forward. His ancient voice echoed across the arena as he announced the result that everyone already knew. The victory goes to Queen Zarathek of the Velthari Empire. The 3 star systems are yours, by right of conquest. But the Queen was not looking at the judge. Her 6 eyes were focused on the small human woman in the crowd. Without the protocol and ceremony that usually surrounded royal behavior, Zarathek walked directly toward the section where Sarah sat. The crowd parted as the towering alien queen approached. Security guards moved to intercept her, but she waved them away with one clawed hand. When she reached Sarah's section, she stopped and spoke in English that was somehow perfect despite the fact that she had never studied the language before this day. Dr. Sarah Chen, Queen Zarathek said, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's sound system. Your species speaks of concepts that we never imagined possible. This jazz you mentioned has not only won me a battle, it has changed how my entire people understand the universe. Sarah stood up slowly, still not quite believing that this was really happening. Around her, aliens from dozens of species stared at the small human who had somehow changed the course of galactic history in a single afternoon. Your Majesty, Sarah said, trying to remember if there was a proper way to address alien royalty. I just saw a pattern that you might not have noticed. Humans are good at seeing patterns because we've had to survive by being creative. We're not as strong as most species, and we're not as smart as others, but we're good at making connections between different ideas. Queen Zarathek's skin shifted to a warm golden color that the Velthari used to show deep respect. What you call making connections may be the most valuable skill in the galaxy. My people have spent thousands of years perfecting our ability to think together, but we never learned to think creatively together. You taught us that in a single day. The crowd began to murmur as news reporters from across the galaxy realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. The famous Velthari queen was publicly acknowledging that a human had taught her something important. This would be the biggest story in decades. Sarah found herself surrounded by floating cameras and recording devices. Reporters shouted questions in languages she could not understand. But Queen Zarathek raised her hand, and the crowd fell silent again. Dr. Chen, the Queen continued, I would like to offer you a position as the first human ambassador to the Velthari Empire. Your people understand things about creativity and improvisation that could help us become better than we ever dreamed possible. In return, we can share our technology and knowledge with humanity. Sarah felt her legs becoming weak. She was just an archaeologist who studied old buildings. The idea of becoming an ambassador to one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy was overwhelming, but as she looked at Queen Zarathek's hopeful expression, she realized that this was about more than just diplomacy. I would be honored, Your Majesty, Sarah said, but I think humans have a lot to learn from you as well. Maybe we can teach each other. The Queen's skin blazed with colors that were so beautiful they made some aliens in the crowd gasp in amazement. Yes, she said. We can learn from each other. This is how alliances should be built. Not through conquest or fear, but through the sharing of ideas. Commander Krex stepped forward. Despite his defeat, he looked curious rather than angry. Human, he said to Sarah, your species interests me. If you can teach the Velthari to fight like artists, perhaps you can teach the Skordons something as well. We have always solved problems with strength and aggression. Maybe there are other ways. Sarah looked at the massive reptilian warrior and smiled. I think every species has its own kind of music, Commander. We just need to learn how to listen to each other's songs. Over the following weeks, news of the battle spread across the galaxy. The story was told and retold on thousands of worlds. How a primitive human species had provided the key insight that changed everything. How creativity had defeated pure logic. How improvisation had overcome perfect planning. But the real changes were just beginning. Queen Zarathek returned to her empire and began teaching her people the concepts that Sarah had introduced. Velthari military academies started including classes on creativity and improvisation. Their scientists began approaching research problems with new flexibility. Their artists created works that were unlike anything they had ever imagined before. Sarah found herself living on the Velthari homeworld, working closely with the Queen to develop new theories that combined human creativity with alien logic. They discovered that when collective consciousness was combined with individual creativity, the results were extraordinary. The Velthari began making advances in science and technology that surprised even themselves. Other species began to take notice. Delegations arrived from across the galaxy, eager to learn about these new ideas. Humans, who had been ignored as a primitive species, suddenly found themselves in demand as teachers and advisors. The galaxy wanted to understand what made human thinking so different and so valuable. Sarah often sat with Queen Zarathek in the royal gardens, teaching her about earth music and human culture. In return, the Queen shared the vast knowledge of her ancient civilization, They would listen to jazz recordings that Sarah had brought from Earth while discussing philosophy, science, and the nature of consciousness itself. "You know," Sarah said one day as they listened to a particularly complex piece of improvised music, "I think what happened in that arena wasn't really about military strategy. It was about communication. You and Commander Krex were trying to communicate with each other, but you were speaking different languages. Once you learned to speak his language, you could have a real conversation." Queen Zarathek's skin shifted to the deep blue color that meant profound understanding. "And now our peoples are learning to speak each other's languages as well. Not just words, but ways of thinking. This may be the beginning of something greater than either of our species could achieve alone." Sarah smiled as she watched the Queen's crystalline form gleam in the alien sunlight. She had come to this world to study ancient ruins, to understand civilizations that had died long ago. Instead, she had helped create something entirely new, a partnership between species that was based on mutual respect for different ways of thinking. The galaxy would never be the same, and it all started with jazz,